Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Carl.
And you're listening to Secret Sonics. Honest conversations chock full of tactical advice to help you build your dream career in music and audio.
Whether it's skill development, mixing mindsets, personal branding, or work-life balance, we talk about ways to help set yourself up for success in the ever-changing music industry.
Let's get started.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
I love that nobody's going to know what we're laughing about.
It's so good.
It's so inappropriate.
How are you today, Carl?
I'm good. Things just got real weird right before we started, and just be thankful you didn't have to hear it. No, I'm good. Yeah, it's a good day. It's a really good day, and it's an even better day now that, I'm here with you.
Same. Likewise. Thanks, Carl. Thanks for being a part of the show.
Of course. And how are you?
I'm doing good, all things considered. We are, trekking along.
Has anything changed dramatically in the past hour since we recorded the last episode?
Now you're giving away how the sausage is made.
I know. Efficiency. Our listeners like efficiency.
It's officially turning into Candid Sonics instead of Secret Sonics.
You can't steal my stupid dad jokes that I say off camera.
I totally just ripped that off of you.
Totally. You know what? You can have that one.
No. This is yours. Carl, this is yours. Okay. Well, Carl, today, for our second conversation, we talked about having a chat about simplicity/minimalism as an audio engineer, or in the studio, or in the world of production, however you want to phrase it. And this is kind of like a bit of a thought experiment. This might go in interesting places, but let's talk about ways that we try to keep a minimalist approach to things and how that helps us. Does that sound like a cool, or maybe too weird, but kind of interesting sort of podcast episode?
I think it'll be cool and weird. So let's do it. Do you have a specific, this was your idea initially that I'm super down with, but I'm curious what sparked this idea.
I don't remember. I don't remember what happened. I don't know how we came up with this idea, or how I came up with this idea. But I think the thing that I was thinking about most was, in the approach to mixing, just like less is more. And people get so caught up in plugins and gear and all kinds of things. And I think that there's also like a place to do that and get caught up with gear and caught up with things and learn things. But I think when you're working on a mix and when you're just trying to like do good work quickly, it's just about like extension of yourself, and the less things in your way, the better. And I think also, like in a mix, sometimes too many plugins could just cause too much bananas to happen, and you can like ruin things so quickly. And so, yeah, Carl is so geared to talk right now for people listening.
Yes.
I just think like less is more. And so like, whether it's the toolkit that you're using to make your mix, whether it's the amount of plugins and processes you're using in your chain, whether it's just how many things are between you and your speakers, that kind of a thing. That's kind of Zen in the art of minimal mixing. That's my pitch. What do you think?
I want to propose an opposite viewpoint.
The maximalist.
No. Still minimalist, but in a very different way than you presented.
Okay, go on.
I agree that less is more. However, often in the conversation of mixing, like in the context of mixing, that usually means less tracks, less plugins. But what about the perspective of each plugin doing less? Each plugin creating less compromises? And an example that I like to use is on my vocals. Most of my vocals go through usually 3, sometimes 4 different de-essers. And multiple levels of compressors too. And you could make the argument that less is more, and like, oh yeah, just use 1 de-esser instead of 4. That's crazy. Or you can make the argument of each of those de-essers is doing a very small specific thing rather than trying to be like a catch-all. So by making each plugin do less, and therefore creating less unintended consequences, less is more in that regard. How does that make you feel?
I think I do more of that actually than what maybe came off when I was initially saying that, because I do actually, my vocal goes through a lot but like you said, none of them are really doing very much. Like maybe there could be 8 plugins on a vocal chain, right? And maybe there's more even on the lead vocal bus, right? Or let's say, for example, let's say it's like 8 plugins and then 3 plugins. And that's not including reverb and delay or whatever else is being used as like an effect. Usually each plugin is doing very little. So there'll be like, that initial EQ that does like a tiny bit of cleanup and maybe getting rid of some boom. And then it'll compress it. And then maybe a de-esser. And then maybe another compressor. And then maybe another EQ. And then another de-esser. But each of those things, that I didn't even get to 8 channels, so it was like 5 or 6 or whatever. That I would say that's a pretty typical vocal chain for me. Like I don't usually get to 4 de-essers, I usually get to like 2. But each one is doing a very specific thing and not much more than that, Like I might have a fast compressor to kind of get like the attack and then a slow compressor to kind of get, there's like the microdynamics and the macrodynamics. I know Nick DiLorenzo likes to talk about that stuff. But like each compressor might be doing a slightly different thing, but it's just doing a little bit of that, That's very much how I operate. But I would say it was more talking about like, I'm not using a trillion different plugins. I'm using pretty much the same stuff every time also in that regard. But yes, I like how you phrased it. It was good.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's a matter of minimal doesn't always mean smaller quantity. It could mean smaller
footprint
amounts of effort that smaller footprint per plugin or more bang for your buck, like toolkit. Maybe you're using like there's 2 EQs that you just go for. One that you like when it adds color and one that you like how it fixes things that you're trying to fix in a track with your EQ. And yeah, sometimes we'll go outside of those, but you could say it's like 80-20. The 20% of your plugins are going to do 80% of the work, but it's probably even more drastic than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to point out that there are like there's the obvious way of thinking about a minimalist approach to mixing, which is using less things, but also there are other ways to apply minimalist concepts.
Okay, but that said, there are times where I've tried like a third de-esser, let's say, and then it's like kind of fixing that thing, but then it's starting to sort of start another thing as a problem that wasn't there before. And sometimes when you're using too many plugins, and this is actually the number of plugins, you're starting to lose your gains, right? Like you start to actually go backwards in time as that track of audio becomes more and more digitally signal processed, so to speak. So I think there is a place where you need to kind of turn things on and off, and kind of really see if that zoom in, zoom out, like we talked about in the previous episode, to just see that this is actually helping, because I think people are just so used to putting things on that you have to kind of take a second and think about, is this addition actually adding to the mix, or is it like starting to subtract from the raw material that was given to me?
So another way to apply minimalism in a mix, how do you feel about suggesting mutes?
Yeah. I wouldn't say this is something that I do a lot, but yeah, like if there's stereo guitars, but they're taking up a lot of space, let's just keep one of them, or maybe there's a part that just wasn't really working, so let's just mute it. I think you have to have conversations with artists/producers when you do that kind of thing. But yes, it's interesting because like this is like a phenomenon I've noticed is like usually tracks that sound the biggest have the least amount of instruments in them. If you have like a really big kick, a really big snare, a bass, and like a synth, you're gonna have a massive sounding song. And a lot of like, it's not just new producers, because I do this too, and a lot of people do this. It depends on the genre and what you're going for, but like people just like pack so much shit in to the point where they're just like, there isn't room anymore for any individual instrument to have any particular depth or bigness to it. So like, I think about this one mix I did a lot of like, I've referenced it, and I won't say what the mix is, but this band had like, they wanted everything sounding warm, and there were cellos and acoustic guitars and like a bass that was very, warm and low MIDI, and like you just can't get it all in there, and then you kind of have lost a lot of the bigness you might have been hoping for by just trying to squeeze so much in there. So like, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So in that sense, there's like the minimalism of, or like trying to minimize the number of unnecessary things in the arrangement in that frequency range. And I would say, like, what I was thinking is there are some times where something can still sound gigantic, even if there are a lot of instruments happening, but the thing that they're playing is simple. And an example that I always use is the Black Keys song Gold on the Ceiling. If you listen to it, that main, like, that main part, I think there's like 3 octaves of synths, 2 octaves of organs, a glockenspiel, I think 2 or 3 guitars, all electric bass, all of this stuff. But they're all, it's like this just massive like wall of sound, but they're all playing in unison. And like there's all this depth and texture that comes from all of the different sounds, but they're all playing just one melodic idea. And all of the drums and all the percussion and the rhythm of the main like guitar parts, which I think there's also a ton of those, are just doing junk, 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 just like a steady kind of swung 16th note pattern, or I guess it would be swung like 8th note pattern in that tempo. So when you listen to it, there's not a lot of things happening. There's a lot of instruments playing. There's a lot of sound happening, but very few things actually going on. There's a lot of things working together to play a single role. And I think when a lot of the, you're saying like new producers, a lot of times what happens is they'll feel like a section isn't full enough. So they'll add a new thing.
Yeah.
But it's not just a new texture or rather than like reinforcing an existing rhythmic pattern or reinforcing an existing pad, they're adding like a part that's also a new melodic part or a new rhythmic part, or it's not like a textural deepening. It's just like adding another new thing.
Right.
And that's probably the biggest takeaway for me, like in general, that I try to get my students and my friends to get is like, if you're going to be adding stuff, there's always room to like add more texture, but there's very rarely more room to add more rhythm. When you have like a bunch of percussion layers, and especially in electronic music producers are like notoriously bad at layering way too many competing things.
Yeah.
And then when you listen to the ones that are like really making waves and like really impacting and influencing people, you realize how simple a lot of it is. And a lot of the depth and character comes from the variation in those sounds, but like there's usually not actually as much going on as it might seem.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your little like rhythmic, because you're a drummer, like you're more in tune with like even rhythmic things than I am as a bass player. But I would say that also texturally you have to be careful. I think the classic idea is a kick drum, right? Like if you have too many kick drums, you can start to have some weird phase issues. Whereas if you just found the right sample for that kick drum and used one sample and it was perfectly phase aligned, that would have a lot more impact. And so I think a lot of times when let's say quote unquote new producers are adding a texture, it's because the initial sound source wasn't so good. And I know that I've been guilty of this, in the past, of like, oh, well, I don't really like this keyboard sound, but if I add this keyboard sound and then we have 2 keyboard sounds together and they're playing the same thing, you're kind of like band-aiding rather than finding a better sample or a better source.
Yeah.
But that's more of a production thing, I think, than a mixing thing.
Not for me. For most of my mixing clients, I do take on an additional production role, even in small amounts. And that's something that I do very regularly, and again, like I'm having these conversations with the artists. I'm not just like doing it and not telling them, like they want me to do those kind of things, like swapping out kick samples and snare samples and like adding reinforcement layers because it's not quite hitting the way that the vision is calling for. So for me, like if I have to do anything other than a shelf or like a high pass or low pass on a kick drum, I'm just getting a different sample.
Wow,
you know what I mean? Like, it's like I'm not going to EQ. Especially, well, again, I'm working in primarily electronic music, so like it's a very different story if I was dealing with like live recorded drums all the time. But like every kick or snare that you get on Splice or wherever, it's going to be super hyped up. It's going to have like a lot of body, a lot of punch, a lot of top end, a lot of smack, a lot of all the things. All the things that most like live recorded kick drums don't have, right? So
yeah,
if it's something that takes me more than just like a simple like
boost
shelf or yeah, like a shelf of some sort, and usually it's cutting. It's usually me getting rid of too much click or too much sub. If I have to do more than just that,
It's the wrong sample.
it's the wrong sample. I mean, I'm gonna look it up right now. If I type in kick in Splice, there are 192,093 results as of the taping of this.
I was going to go for like 5 trillion, but sure.
Close. But yeah, so like there's going to be a better sound out there for what I need. And that's going to, again, cause less unintended consequences. So it's minimal. It's like that's minimalist. That's like removing the need for more plugins by just fixing it at the source. And
Absolutely.
in this case, the source isn't mic placement or performance. It's just the sample itself.
Yeah. And I would say that like sometimes, which you were harking on at the beginning of like, let's say you get a bunch of tracks with like a bunch of textures in there, you could kind of figure out maybe as, an objective third party now, like which of these textures maybe we can get rid of and have an overall better sound anyways by hitting the mute button.
Oh yeah, and which of the textures is making this moment better, or which of the textures is supporting this moment versus which of the textures is distracting you from the moment.
Yeah.
And my question earlier about, muting things, it doesn't have to be for the entirety of the song. It can be even just little simple things as if there's a moment before a big chorus and I want the air to suck out of the room and I automate the volume of all of the reverb sends to dry up for that quarter note. Like I'm minimizing the number of things happening in that section to create an even bigger contrast for when the downbeat comes in and kicks you in the teeth.
Yeah. Love it. Arrangement. Everything is arrangement. Hey everyone, friend of the podcast and Grammy-nominated engineer/mixer Travis Ferrance hosts Progressions, Success in the Music Industry.
It's a podcast exploring creativity, productivity, and growth in music. Travis has set out to document his own journey and bring those valuable lessons to you to apply to your own career.
Join in each week for conversations with some of the industry's best and brightest about the mindsets and strategies that they use in their careers every day.
Whether you're feeling stuck, digging for inspiration, or just looking for a mix tip, Progressions is probably for you.
Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts or click the link in the show notes. I think I remember why I thought about this topic, and I think it was because I was like, yeah, we should give like people like a rig rundown and like what are we actually like mixing with, And you were like, I don't know, monitors, computer, like headphones or speakers, like that's it. And I was like, okay, so really we're keeping it minimal. Maybe we could just kind of tell people like how minimal we try to keep it in terms of like physical things that we use to work.
Yeah. I think that's the beautiful thing about doing what I do and doing what I do, how I do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being a remote mix engineer, not doing tracking, not doing live band productions, not doing Atmos, or whatever, like not doing Foley for film, like all the things that I could be doing, but I'm not. And I think that's the beautiful thing is the
niching down is a minimalism, right? Like just that, in and of itself.
But what I do like is, I don't want to say like it benefits from minimalism, but it definitely enables minimalism. Whereas if my main thing was tracking, especially like orchestra tracking or something, then I would need a lot more stuff. I would need a much bigger toolbox than what I need to do here. A much bigger like physical toolbox of things. But I'm not doing tracking and I don't need to. And when I do track, I go to another studio. I just go to a friend's studio in town. I can let everybody else collect gear. I can just pay them a couple bucks to use it.
Amazing. And so what you just have like monitors, a computer, and some plugins, and you're good to go. Interface.
Yeah. I mean, like I've been doing weirdly enough, like I don't care if anybody like thinks this is not a good thing, but like I've been doing mixes in these Sennheiser HD 280s and getting things approved, and they sound great, and they sound better than my old mixes that I did on monitors.
Really? You're fully in headphones now?
I'm not fully, but I'm just saying like sometimes I do them in my headphones and like with SonarWorks, and they're great. It works. And then like they sound, I'm really proud of those mixes. So it's not, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this in a way that isn't going to offend people. But like some people don't go as minimalist as they could or should because they feel like they have to keep up appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why my website, I have no gear on my website. I have no pictures of gear. Just that's not why people hire me.
Right. You're not trying to attract people that are just looking for gear. That's not what you're going for.
And that's not necessarily I'm not saying that that's objectively a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, for me, for what I do and for what I'm passionate about, like, that's not what would attract the people that I want to work with. So by me, you said about, like niching down, by me doing that and being really clear about who I want to attract. It makes it more minimal about, or how I present myself. It, makes it a minimal scope of the kind of things that I want to talk about on social media. And it gives clarity and focus, because
gives you a lot of clarity is exactly the word I was thinking about.
You don't have everything at your fingertips. Like I'm not going through, a folder of 75 cracked, LA2A emulations every time that I need to pull up a compressor.
Right. Yeah.
And the same thing with doing social media and stuff for my website and reaching out to clients. Like I know what I'm good at. I know what my ideal clients need from me.
And you know exactly what to sell, because you're not trying to sell a million services also. You're not like, hey, let's do voiceover work also while we're at it. Let's, you're not like the doing everything possible to make a buck sort of a audio house.
Yeah. So the minimalism as a mixing engineer also applies to the way that I present myself as a mixing engineer.
Yeah.
Not just in the session.
I think minimalism is also about like knowing what you're using, because you've just used it so many times, and not like trying, not that you don't try things, but like I know these Sonys, even though people can shit on these Sony 7506s, I use a little bit of EQ on them with my RME interface to get an EQ curve that makes sense to me. And I just, if I need headphones, I just trust it because I've used it so many times and it's minimal. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's minimal. I'm not reaching to a trillion different headphones to check my mix on headphones. I just have what I know, and that's it.
And your minimalism is based on experience, not based on principle. Because I feel like there is a distinction there, because there are some people that are minimalists by principle.
I think I've always taken a minimalist approach. Like, well, you could shit on me because I really don't have enough experience with analog gear, but I think I've always I've made conscious decision to not go into that territory on purpose. So like, I know until you use it, you don't know, but like I've always been in the box for mixing. Obviously I have preamps and stuff, but like from the get-go, I made a conscious decision to stay in the box. There's just too many factors once you leave the box. Also for like cost effectiveness and stuff, like not to go under just buying gear, but like it was very conscientious of me to stay in the box always this whole time. And I've never felt a need to leave the box. I've always felt like I'm good in the box. As technology gets better, I could do more in the box. But for me, this has always been like, an ethos of like, we don't need all this extra stuff. Let's do this in here. Great records are being made in the box. People like Andrew Sheps have proved that for years. So like, what else do you need to do? Let's just make this work.
But I don't think that, I would still make a distinction between what you're saying versus what I was saying about people that are minimalists out of principle, or maybe a better way would be out of spite. Because
I'm not out of spite. No.
You're not out of spite. You're using what you use because it's practical and it works for you, and you're familiar with it, and it gets a good result. I'm saying like you're not consciously looking at your plugin folder and say, I only want one EQ. You know what I mean? Like you're not doing it like you don't have extra stuff, but you're not intentionally trying to constrain yourself.
Do you try to constrain yourself?
No.
We're not really.
I don't have the energy. I have two kids. But
if I have
two kids and a wife, they do enough constraining.
Yeah, it's exactly. But if there's gear that I don't use, I will get rid of it. Not everything, but a lot of things. And like, I sold the drum set because I was never using it. I wasn't recording it. I was like, okay, this stage of my life of having a drum set and sometimes recording a drum set is over. I got rid of it. I wanted to extend my wife's maternity leave, so I sold my upright bass. And like the story of me bringing this bass to Israel is a whole story for another time. and like how much heart and soul and heartache went into everything revolving my upright bass and me trying to become an upright bass player at the end of high school and all these things. And I just said, you know what? I don't play this bass. Maybe I'll get into upright bass when I'm in my 50s, when the kids are older. Like until then, it's just sitting around and it's massive and we need the money to extend my wife's maternity leave. Let's get rid of it. So like I definitely am for getting rid of stuff if you're not using it. I think that people hold on to stuff that they don't need to hold on to, and you could put your money towards better things. There's a bit of that in there for me, but it's not a full ethos. You know what I mean? It's not like a full, against the odds. This is what I do. I'm getting rid of everything but the Pro Q, and like all pull tech EQs can go to hell. I am not there.
Well, I think there's also, if you want to talk about like the spite, there's also quite a few people that will only use out of the box things and they don't want to use anything digital.
I think there's something admirable about that, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I just am saying like there's
it's a commitment. It's a commitment.
Yeah. But in a way, you could also say that they're minimalists in the sense of wanting to stay within a constraint, and that constraint being all analog. Right. I know
we're getting so heady here.
Go so heady because I think that's great, because I think just how the word producer can mean so many different things to different people even within the music industry, without even zooming out to like the entertainment industry, without zooming out to like industry as a whole. And I think it's good to talk about all of the different definitions of minimalism and the different applications of minimalism that we can use, because it's not just we'll do less plugins, record less things. I think it goes way deeper than that.
Yeah. I think maybe what we're like kind of like getting to is intentionality. Or maybe that's what you're getting to.
No, that's great. Yeah.
And like everything we're doing, we're trying to be intentional with. And so like for us, staying in the box is very intentional. And for us, not using too many plugins is intentional. And trying not to overprocess the mix is also intentional. And like I didn't say this earlier, but like we all go through a period where we overdo it on a mix, right? We all go through that stuff. And that's part of that is that learning process of understanding what it's like to overdo it. And it's also learning EQ, like, or compression. Like if you push it to the max, you understand it better. Like I used to get rid of way too many whistle overtone frequencies. And then, you sterilize your mix. And then I learned that lesson the hard way because I did it so many times. And now I don't do that anymore. And, but like I had to go through that era in order to get to this new era where I don't do that very often.
But I'm sure it's the same thing with plugins. Like you need to use a lot of different compressors to figure out what it is about a compressor that you like and what it is about a compressor that you don't like. It's just different stages along the progression of not just learning, but also of confidence.
Confidence leads to intentionality, which leads to minimalism sometimes.
In various forms.
I know we're running out of time, but there was one more thing I wanted to maybe ask you about in terms of minimalism. Do you feel like minimalism ever affects the way you keep track of clients and billing and like kind of the more businessy side of being a freelancer, mixing engineer?
I wish it influenced it more. I think it does. I think it does in the sense of when I find something that works for me, like how I've been using Trello for years and you've been using Notion for years.
Well, I'm using Trello also now for some things. Actually, I still use Notion we'll get into that in another episode.
Yeah. After the AI episode, because we need to do that.
The AI episode will happen
You owe
first.
me. You owe me an AI episode. But when there are things like that, that are simple and repeatable and systematized, then yes, I'd say that would be where the minimalism comes in. But at the same time, I'm always trying new things. I'm always experimenting and figuring out how to do it better. And not just, I don't mean like how can I keep track of my file deliverables better. It's like how can I make the user experience better, and how can I shape the things that are going on behind the scenes in a way that helps to enable those changes. So it's minimalism, but it's minimalism with a shifting footprint. Does that make sense? Is that a thing?
I'm not sure. Maybe you can.
I mean, so
elaborate.
I'd say like, yes, I try to keep things minimal, but I'm always trying to find things that I could maybe replace an element, and like what is included in my like minimalist approach might change and morph. So like it's always
you're not
like,
committed to the specific path. It evolves.
Yeah, the path evolves, and how I apply minimalism evolves.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, both of us are not really minimalists. We're just intentionalists. And sometimes minimalism makes sense in that intentionality.
I like that.
The intentionalist.
That sounded very smart. Yeah, that sounded smart, and you made me sound smart.
Just riffing here.
I like that. The Intentionalists podcast.
Yeah, the intentional mixing podcast. Yeah, I think having like a consistent way of sharing files, and like clients get used to using those systems. Like for me, FilePass is great for mixing, and like people get used to it and they know how to put their revisions or whatever. It keeps things in the same place. It keeps it simple and minimal for the artist, and it also keeps it simple and minimal for me because I know where I'm sharing that file and I know where it's going. And kind of organizing is also part of that. Like, I know what mix one is going to be versus like I'll go up a number if it's like on a different day. If it's on the same day, then it'll be like a 0.1 or 0.2 or whatever. Like all these things, like I know what to do and like how to deliver the file. And I would say more of that than it's all intentional.
And I think that also frees up brain space because you know what you're going to name the file. You never have to think about it. You just kind of follow the format that you've come up with. So you're not thinking about, what should I name this? It's just like, okay. Like for me, it's like artist name _ song title _ and then whatever the name is. Or like if I'm printing mixed stems, it's always like artist name _ song title _ BPM _ stem name. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to try to think of, what cool name should I call this? It's just easy. And it's minimizing the number of things that I have to think about that are not creative.
Right. Nobody wants to see the final mix .5 actually final .master .wave or whatever.
And now, so now that we're talking about it, another way that minimalism can be expressed is in delegation.
Go on.
By, I have somebody like my assistant Ethan usually preps my mixes, and I use Bounce Butler to print mix stems. So I'm minimizing the amount of
tasks
or the scope of my involvement, and really minimizing it down to the things that bring me the most joy, which is the additional production, the actual like creative parts of the mixing, not the file prep.
Amazing. So it's minimalism and intentionality, everybody. This has been a fun episode. I think I think we got a little heady, and I think it brought out interesting things from both of us. So yeah.
Yeah, and for the record, before we hit record, you did call it was it a plane crash or was it a dumpster fire? You said
it was a burning. I don't remember. Crash and burn.
It was fire dumpster. Was fire dumpster from an earlier episode?
Fire dumpster was from an earlier episode.
Yeah,
yes.
It was going to be a total fire dumpster. But no, this was weird and good, and weird, but mostly good, but also mostly weird.
Yeah.
I like it.
Oh, well, you know what? We'll let the audience decide, and they can, let us know what they thought about this episode by DMing us and trash talking us or not.
I feel like anybody that's still listening will only have nice things to say.
Let's hope.
And you know why? It's because we love you, and you're great, and you're beautiful, and your snares sound amazing. And thanks for listening. Okay, bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. If anything here resonated with you, please share this or your favorite episode with a friend.
And as always, we love to hear from our listeners. So find us on social media at Secret Sonics,
at Ben Wallach Music,
and at Carl Bonner. Until next time, bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. That was good. I think the outro was great.